Crusader Kings 3, one culture is not enough. Are they writing in Dev Diary 65? What's this about? It's about forming a hybrid culture, so combining two cultures. It's about diverging your culture from another culture, so splitting up a culture from a bigger culture. And it's about dynamic emergence of hybrid cultures. So the game, the AIs, will also create hybrid cultures. This is an option that you can turn on and off, or you have like different strengths of how often that is done. So let's look into the details. It's quite inspiring, actually. It's nice. It's so dynamic. So first, forming a hybrid culture. We have learned that you can form your own culture now, and one way of that is forming a hybrid culture. Is a way for you to meld the aspects of your current culture with that of another in any way you so choose. There are a few restrictions. First, the culture you want to form a hybrid with has to be present within your realm. So, second, you need a certain amount of cultural acceptance. You cannot go and do it with wildly different cultures. Just like conquer an area and create a new culture. The required amount can vary depending on your current traditions. So, if the cultures are very similar, you can do it quicker. And you cannot hybridize with a culture of the same heritage as you. The reasoning here is that the two cultures have to be different enough to warrant them being combined into a single culture rather than just assimilating one in favor of the other. So there needs to be a little bit of a difference to be able to combine cultures. Otherwise, they would be one from the start. So once you're able to form a hybrid culture, you can make a name for it. For example, Andaluso-French, Greco-Persian. And there's a set of names that can appear depending on which cultures you hybridize where you're creating your new culture. So it can be inspired by locations, by cultures, by languages, things like that. For example, hybridizing a culture of Frankish heritage with one of a Central Germanic heritage in the area and surrounding Lotharingia. You can have culture named Rhinelander. You're of course free to name the culture whatever you want. But it gives you like cool things. Like if you want to play historically accurate, it will be close to that. So you can freely pick between the two cultures' pillars when you start with the pillars, mixing ethos, heritage, language and martial custom as you would like. For example, you could pick the heritage from culture A, but language from culture B. One caveat is that you have to pick at least one pillar from each culture. It isn't much of a hybrid otherwise. So, as you can see here, spiritual, communal. You have to select, in that case, heritage, you have to select the language, you have to select the martial custom. That's the menu for it. New culture will be created with you as the culture head. That's one of the big advantages. You form a new culture, a hybrid culture, a totally new culture, and you become the culture head. You have the control over it. Then there's acceptance, that you can already see. Acceptance of Kashmiris. Afghans will be 100%. And you'll discover these two Afghan innovations. In that case, Afghan Kashmiri, you'll have the two Afghan innovations. You're probably coming from a Kashmiri culture in that case. Close family will convert. Some of your vassals will convert. And maybe you can convince the vassals too. The cost is, as said, prestige. Each ruler can only form a hybrid culture once. The new culture will be unable to form a new hybrid for 50 years. So it's not easily done. It's probably done once per, if you have very long-living rulers, once per ruler. The same principle applies to traditions. Can pick and choose which traditions you want to keep from either culture as long as you don't go above the slot limit. The slot limit is dependent on the time period you're in, roughly, and the technologies. You can even choose to only pick a few traditions, leaving slots empty and give room for future traditions that you may want to adopt later. Some traditions are unique to certain cultures, regions or heritage, however, so this is the only chance you might have to acquire traditions that would normally be out of your reach. So you can have specialized traditions from the original cultures here. Something like, in that case, Futuwar, whatever that is then, or Himalayan settlers. That would be something that is specialized and that you can only get at this screen. while loyal soldiers, esteemed hospitality, and mountain homes seems to be applicable to all of the cultures. Aesthetics working the same way, free to pick and choose all the subcomponents from either culture. For some of the categories, you're even able to choose a hybrid option using the preset from both cultures. The hybrid option exists for names, fashion, and coats of arms. Are you hybridizing a culture from East Africa with an Indian culture? Perhaps you'd like to go for the Indian unit, hybrid naming, Indian architecture, African fashion, hybrid coats of arms. Combination is up to us. As you can see here, you can choose between the military equipment looks, then you'll have the naming practices, you'll have the style of the architecture, very cool that you can choose that. Of course, you'll become the culture head and you'll have the rest of it here. So image, as you can see, there's the 3 menus here. The pillars, traditions, aesthetics. That's what you get through. Then you can finally form the hybrid culture. And that's probably the overview. Oh, that's continued from the aesthetics. There's more aesthetics. As you can see, that's the fashion, Indian hybrid or Arabic fashion. And the coats of arms, Indo-Aryan, hybrid Iranian. Yeah, the good elephant here. The new hybrid culture will automatically acquire any innovation that either parent culture has discovered already, giving you the possibility to gain access to innovations that your previous culture has yet to discover. So you can also get innovations faster that way, if you're kind of lucky. And there's a prestige cost to forming a hybrid culture, as you can see here. Creation isn't very expensive, relies more on having enough cultural acceptance for it to be valid. A high acceptance will reduce the cost, making it fairly cheap if you've managed to greatly increase acceptance. Yeah, for example, if you want to merge 2 different cultures that are one is very peace-oriented, one is very warlike, then that will also increase the cost because the cultural acceptance is so low. The initial size of hybrid culture on the map also depends on the acceptance you've built up between the 2 cultures. So if you have a long-going realm where the 2 cultures live and they're both content, they're both living with each other for a time, then it's just easier. We decided to hybridize at the lowest required acceptance level. The hybrid will start out rather small. Rulers of hybrid cultures have a much easier time using the Promote Culture Council task in counties belonging to either of its parent cultures for a set amount of years after it has been formed. So it gets a starting boost, the culture. And it's of course easier. For example, if Afghan Kashmiri, you have an Afghan culture, it's easier to transform it. If you have Kashmiri culture, it's easier to transform it. Or maybe also if you have another maybe Indo-Kashmiri, then Indo-Kashmiri might also be easier to convert to your culture. Then you can also diverge your culture. Essentially a culture that deviates from the original culture, allowing the opportunity to shape it as you see fit. So culture, it's an interesting concept because you tend to think it comes naturally, but always rulers or big like spiritual persons, popes, and so on have had in the past a very big influence on what cultures have emerged, what cultures have gone down the drain, if you want so. So you can diverge the culture from maybe a dying culture, if you want so. Similar to forming a hybrid, you get to choose a name for the new culture, of course. The default name depends on the primary title. Diverging a culture as the King of Anatolia can give you an Anatolian culture, or Austrian if you're the Duke of Austria too. So what kind of culture you get is dependent on the ruler, on the person. It's a personal thing, like as so often in Crusader Kings 3. It makes sure that the divergent cultures always have a sensible name to them, at least most of the time. There's a Wormsian culture from the county of Worms, for example. As with hybridization, you're free to name it however you want if you don't want to use the default generated name, which is very cool, of course. That's what you want, right? Customization, I always want that. For the pillars, options are slightly different. Can pick and choose any ethos. Language won't have any additional options for you most of the time because it's diverging from the parent culture. Martial custom can be changed as long as you fulfill the conditions for them. It would include things such as having a corresponding succession law. Aesthetics will also have rarely have additional options except in some historical cases. Diverging from Norse in Sweden, for example, will give you access to Swedish aesthetics. So from Norse to Swedish, like the more modern one. You have to change at least one pillar in order to diverge your culture. There has to be a difference. Like if you want to combine two cultures, there has to be a difference between them. And also if you want a specialized culture, it has to be different than the other cultures. You cannot just say, hey, this is my culture. It's totally the same, but it has a new name. And it's my culture. I'm now the culture head. Most of the time, you won't have a lot of valid alternatives for the additional pillars. So your only option will be to change your ethos, usually. Because that's like a very small step. Like it's the beginning of something that you have your own. So the ethos will change because that's easiest done. It doesn't have very high prerequisites. As you can see here, close family will convert, 2 of 3 vassals will convert. So it's a bitter Israeli culture. Acceptance of Ethiopians in that case will be 100%. And you will become the culture head. You can only choose one language in that case. Martial custom, that is grayed out. Aesthetics as well. Only one option, and it's got a pretty steep prestige cost as well. So it's about the same prestige cost as hybridizing a culture. Traditions can be replaced with something new. So as long as you're able to afford the tradition cost. So you cannot use this process to skip the tradition cost if you want to switch between traditions. Unlike hybridization, you will have plenty of options and can replace a tradition with any other tradition that your culture fulfills the requirements of. So it always has a requirement. For example, you need to have like highlands or mountains probably for Highlanders or mountains. Or in that case, Amharic Highlanders is something very, very specific. And you might have to have mountains for mountain skirmishing. So in that case, you could not create the culture, the new culture, as you can see here, because you're missing so much because you changed up the traditions. As you can see, there's a very high cost if you do that in between. It's a cost that each ruler can only diverge a culture once. This divergent culture cannot have another culture diverge from it for 200 years. So it's much harder to create an own culture that way. It also has a prestige cost that you will amass in one lifetime of a ruler, maybe. Diverging also costs prestige. Here the cost scales on how much your own culture you control. Attempting to diverge Greek as Byzantium will be fairly expensive. Meanwhile, attempting to diverge a small part of your culture, such as a small Andalusian emir on the Iberian Peninsula, will be significantly cheaper. Then you have the dynamic culture emergence. So all of this, and also with the default names, also happens on an AI level, if you want so. The above options describe how you as a player will be able to create new cultures, but they will also appear dynamically. Over the course of a campaign, cultures might diverge depending on the situation. Maybe sometimes also historically through events. I don't know. For dynamic divergent cultures, we decided that we wanted them to feel immersive, logical whenever they showed up. There go many factions into this, such as culture size. Culture is united under strong rulers. Divergent cultures will appear either in border regions where a culture meets another, or several others, or in island regions. So, like not on a boring continent, for example, like in a united continent. That's a very low probability. Divergences also do not appear in the capital lands of the culture head, in order to safeguard what is most likely the heartland of the culture. So it will not split from that. For example, one of the cultures that usually diverge a few times in 1066 is the Bedouin culture. It's large, spread out, and some of its lands are under rulers that are not Bedouin themselves. On the other hand, there's Greek, a large culture with practically all counties of its culture united under one ruler. Tend not to diverge unless territories co-independent. Hybridization is something powerful rulers strive towards. So that's it's also easier done, as we've seen. If a ruler finds themselves ruling a large swath of land of a foreign culture, while at the same time having no motivation to assimilate, they'll try and increase cultural acceptance until they're eligible for hybridization, to form an own culture combining the newly conquered lands into the culture. Integration. They tend to want to hybridize with larger cultures in their realm, the prime example being the Oghuz Seljuks wanting to hybridize with Persian, of all other cultures they have in the realm. Some AI rulers do not pursue hybridization though, such as large elective realms, for example the Holy Roman Empire, where cultures take turns being the top ruler, or realms such as the papacy. So there are some special cases that will not follow these rules, because they're just that special. By default, the AI will not create hybrids of hybrids unless historical hybrids, such as Maghrebi or English, as the naming schemes can go quickly out of hand. Though, if you'd like the AI to do this, there's a game rule you can enable. Quickly coming to that. There's also a small chance that hybrids appear in realms of not so powerful rulers. This allows interesting hybrids such as Hiberno Norse to appear, even from tiny realms. This happens through an event that can also occur for the player. These events will most often happen for cultures that have certain traditions that allow them to more easily create hybrids with other cultures. So it's customizable. If you rather want to play dynamic, then there's that option. Naturally, there's a host of game rules allowing to customize the experience, but you can also set diverging or hybrid cultures to none. Want the AI to create hybrids of hybrids of hybrids of hybrids, then you can set the restrictions to very relaxed, as you can see here. There's the frequency of hybrid cultures, of the hybrid restrictions, the divergent culture frequency, and these three are the new options we'll have. So you can adjust it as you would like it. So, and what they did there, they made an experiment with the new rules in a test game, in an observing game, I think. So they took the 867 start, 200 years in. There's some new cultures: Anglo-Norse hybrid culture, Cambro-Norse hybrid culture, Norse Gaelic culture, emerging in 918, 948, and 1029. There's also English that has largely replaced Anglo-Saxon as the dominant culture in England, which is a great success. It's very cool that this develops like that. It's also kind of a likely thing to appear, so it seems to work okay. There's another start here. 100 years into the game, there is a Bedouin divergence, emerged in 933. There's Badariani Mashriki divergence in 956. Kurdo Mashriki hybrid culture in 911. Niha Wandi Persian divergence in 907, and Sherwani Persian divergence emerged in 946. So it has the feel that it's coming close to a simulation in this reality, which is always something I really like. It has something in its thoroughness. It has something like, I just love it to be that thorough. It feels more alive if you have these dynamic systems at work that are based on certain prerequisites and a kind of a rule set, a good rule set. In another game, in 1066, starting, Swedish noblewoman was made queen in the newly established Kingdom of Jerusalem. Following a successful crusade, after a few generations, the local cultures merged into what would become Mashriki Swedish, ushering the kingdom into a new era of prosperity. The Mashriki Swedish culture, something very exceptional and also very interesting. So we'll have a look at that. So it's a spiritual culture with North Germanic heritage but Arabic language, martial men only, and Mashriki Swedish aesthetics. Forest fighters, which is interesting in that region for sure. Stand and fight fervent temple builders, of course, on Mubarizun. That's something that was kept. And the culture head here that was currently working on the trebuchets, as you can see. So there's also a number of historical names for cultures that can appear in specific circumstances. And there's something here. If you have any cultural names that would make sense for a divergent or hybrid culture, let us know. Who knows? Perhaps the suggestion ends up in the game. So if you have an idea or if you have some expert knowledge, just post it under the thread. I'm linking it in the description below too. So how do you like that system? It has something, for me, it has something in its thoroughness. This approaches like the Crusader Kings 2, and even in that, as in the cultural aspect, it eclipses it. It has something in its thoroughness that is almost Dwarf Fortress-like, like into that direction at least. And I'm fascinated by things that go that way. It doesn't also seem to be overboard. So, as everything, I have to say, in Crusader Kings 3, it seems very well thought out and good to come to us. Oh, have a great time until next time, and happy gaming. This is Immanuel Can signing out. See you soon, and happy gaming.